Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, and those of you who may be watching at home, thank you for listening. This is the December meeting of the Police Oversight Board. We have a change to the agenda, but we'll get to that in a second. I'd like to welcome everybody here and call this meeting to order. Mr. Cruz, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you, Mr. Cruz. My name is Joanne Fine, and I am the chair of this hardworking group of volunteers. And I wanted to start with the mission statement, which for the Police Oversight Board, which is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD in the Albuquerque community. The next item is approval of the agenda, and I know we need to move Mr. Cruz's Personnel Committee up under item number 6. So between 6 and 7, we will move that up. Is there anybody else who wants a change in the agenda? There being none, I'd accept a motion to accept the agenda with this change.
I motion to accept the agenda with the change.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Madam Chairman, I'm going to have to leave early. I just thought I'd say it now. I'll have to leave at 5:45.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to introduce our newest member, and I actually asked her if she would introduce herself. We've met her, but the people in the audience have not met her, and the people at home haven't met you. So would you please tell them a little bit about yourself, Chantel?
Sure. My name is Chantel Galloway. I was born and raised in Albuquerque and have lived here all but 10 years of my life. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock and a master's degree from the University of New Mexico. I am a mom of a beautiful 2-year-old boy, and family owns a business here in town, so very much rooted in the Albuquerque community.
Thank you for signing up. We all know how much work is involved, and you will know soon. But I just want you to know, we assume you did some research to find out how much work that is, and we are grateful to you for signing up. I also wanted to acknowledge Johnny J. Armijo was inducted into the New Mexico Music Hall of Fame, and we didn't get to acknowledge him last time. He couldn't be here. So that being said, we are ready. Do we have any public comments? No? Sorry. Okay. I'm going to do my level best to get us out of here quickly because everybody's moving to the holidays, and my holidays is this week. So I would like to get us going. Review and approval of the minutes. Were there any changes to the minutes? Anyone?
I move their approval as written.
Thank you.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. What is today's date? I can't remember. 14th? Yeah.
14.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Cruz, will you give us the report of the Personnel Committee, please?
Yes, ma'am. Please feel free to interject as you see fit. I can make sure I cover everything. We had our first personnel meeting on 13 November to go over the survey to evaluate Director Harness's performance. The survey was sent out to CPOA, office personnel, the POB lawyers, the CPCs, the city attorney, and some other addressees. Following the 13 November meeting, we had a meeting on 5 December to go over the results that we had received from the survey, and we had a total of 9 respondents with who scored Director Harness on a scale of 1 to 5. Would you like me to go through the...
And 5 is high.
5 is the highest, yes. Would you like me to go through the scores? So the first area to be evaluated through is contributions towards the purpose of the CPOA office, which he received a 5 across all respondents. Second is community outreach. He received a 4.8. Third is policy recommendation. He received a 4.8. Fourth is quality investigations, received a 4.6. Management of staff, 4.5. Transparency, 4.6. Independence, 4.6. Data analysis, 4.4. Training for POB and staff, 4.3. Reporting, 4.3. Collaboration and relationships, 4.6. Communications, 4.8. Maintaining confidentiality, 5.0. And overall, he received a 4.6 out of 5 score. Out of the meeting, on the 5 December meeting with Director Harness, we came out with some action items or some things we'd like to see with, from him, is a data analysis plan, the community outreach plan, and also a committee chair check-in, and we didn't set up a time for that yet, but that's something we'd like to see in the future. And I know I had something to work on my end, and that was to get a hold of the city financial office, and I did. I got a hold of Patsy Pino, who left me a voicemail saying that she was going to work with Mary Scott, but she needed to review his contract first. And she'd only be able to do that on Monday once Mary returned to the office. She stated that no raises were given to non-union employees, and the contract would need to identify raises outside of city employees. So I haven't looked at the verbiage yet on that, so I can't give any input into that yet.
So the contract that Mr. Harness operates under is a contract with the board, and isn't that right?
Chair Fine, actually, the contract is with the city.
Through the board? How is the board connected to this?
It's connected in that the board has, the board or the council, I'm sorry.
No, I mean the board. I mean, we're waiting for permission or some rules. One of the reasons Mr. Cruz was calling the city was to see what rules do we play in? What are the rules that involve us giving you a raise out of our budget, at the contract for extending your contract? I want to know how we do that and when we can do that. And I don't have the answers to that question yet. And what I hear Mr. Cruz saying is somebody at the city is going to make that decision, not us, which is that how it works? We make a recommendation and they take that recommendation?
Chair Fine, yes, that's correct, because ultimately it all has to be approved by the city through city budgeting. In sending the contract over to Board Member Cruz and Director Scott today, I did review a couple of the provisions, and the provisions for renewing the contract would entail the board making a recommendation to the city council, which the city council would have to then approve for a new contract.
And the timeline for that is, when does your other contract expire?
My contract expires in October of 2018.
Okay, so we got some time.
Yes.
But the raise part, that's the other thing we were trying to do, is to sync the raise with the budget, to try to get those things tied together. It's currently, your evaluation time is based on when you started. So we were hoping to get some information from the city about how that works. And we don't know. So who does know?
Chair Fine, that would be Patsy Pino, who Board Member
Who we
Cruz-
talked to.
Correct.
And she owes me a phone call as of Monday once Mary Scott gets back into the office.
Okay.
Chair Fine,
Yes.
didn't we go through the evaluation portion and also a few months back request an increase for Director Harness?
No, it was a year ago. I mean, it was last year that we did an
Well,
evaluation.
my point is, what was the process then? Is it the same or has that changed?
Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, that's correct. Last year, there was a recommendation for a pay increase, which went to budgeting, Ms. Pino, and it was reapportioned in the CPOA POB budget. The budget, the numbers are set, so if there is to be a wage increase, then it has to come from somewhere else. And so budgeting takes care of that.
Well, we have the opportunity for the board to review this evaluation and make a recommendation moving forward on that very item. But we don't know what the rules are, which makes it difficult. So I can think of a couple of ways we need to go. We can deal with the evaluation itself. People can ask for or make comments about that. We can approve what we've done in the Personnel Committee and leave the raise to once we have more information. But the board can vote on or accept the findings of the Personnel Committee relative to that after a discussion, if you'd like to do it that way. Eric, what's your recommendation?
I would move that we have any discussion and any questions I could field at this time over the process or the.
Okay. So does anyone have any questions about the evaluation or? One of the things we decided in our committee, I'm on the Personnel Committee too, and one of the things we decided was that next year we're doing it through SurveyMonkey, which Eric would save all of us a lot of time and would be much easier to do. It costs a little money. We're going to spend the money because that's the way it's going to be. If anyone has any thoughts about how to make the process better, this would be an appropriate time to collect those thoughts and give it to Eric, because this is a great time to improve the process, though I think it was better this year than last year, and I thought last year was good. So.
And then there was also some confusion on the community outreach and data analysis. There was some expectation that Director Harness accomplished those tasks himself, but that was more of how him and his staff execute those. So we need to be a little bit more clear next year.
So I think there was some confusion. People were thinking, well, Amanda does the outreach, so why are we evaluating Ed? Well, everything starts from Ed. So even though he's not the one that's doing the in the weeds stuff, he still is responsible for it happening. So we're going to make the questions more tied to the job description when we do the evaluation next year. So it'll be easier to see that that's a distinction we're making. We're not asking you to evaluate Amanda or the data people in Ed's evaluation. We're asking you as a organization, how is that going? And so we think there's an opportunity to make the questions a little more clear. And the other thing is that in terms of the data, I would say that we've had so many problems with getting data that I think that and we've had a conversation, Mr. Harness and I have, I think we're at the place where we need to, and we continue to have problems with the data contract now. And so I think we've been trying to figure out what the police department has in terms of data and what we can extrapolate from what they have. And I think it's time to be proactive, not reactive. And my recommendation is that we decide in the data plan what information we think should be collected and then we can find out whether or not the police department can accommodate that. And if they can't, perhaps they can change how they accommodate that. But we need to make a decision about what kind of data we're looking for, not based on what they have.
Madam
Yes,
Chairman, I feel strongly that the policy that ABD passes, especially all the ones that are under CASA, should have at the end of each policy the type of data that will be collected to decide whether
That's a
the
great
policy
idea.
is, whether the policy is functioning well and where revisions need to be made. I can't believe that we do these policies without collecting the relevant data.
That's a great idea.
Okay,
That's a great idea.
we'll have to just really push it because it's been stuck on the bottom of that recommendation forever for the policy on policies, and it just gets no traction. So if you have anyone has any ideas of how it can get some traction, that would be great. I think Bill could use all the help we can muster.
if I could comment, I think that's a good idea, and I think, you know, when we get to policy or get to my report, we start to address that a little bit, and that is to look at the various policies that exist and try to identify, you know, mostly it's if the CPOA is mentioned in the policy, then I think we need to have something that recognizes specifically what the obligation is of APD to furnish data or furnish access or whatever it is. So we can talk about that more, but I don't want to cut this off, but there will be, you know, I'll have something more to say about that.
Let's get back to the evaluation part, but I think you're right, we do need to do that, and I think, Sue, that's a great idea. The other thing is outreach. I think we're stalling in the outreach department because we don't have an overall vision of what it is we should be doing. And so I think that should be the first order of business, and we could see that in the evaluation. We could see that the questions that we asked about outreach were really confusing. The comments were made it clear to us that there is a need for clarification of what the mission is and what it is exactly we want to get out of outreach. So we thought the staff could come up with, maybe in concert with the outreach committee, but also just the staff itself, to say, what should outreach look like? Not in a reactive way, but again, in a proactive way. And I think that's just the evolution of us being formed. We were trying to deal with the information that we were trying to gather, and so we were in a reactive stance. So I really think it's a good time with the change in leadership at the city and the council changes and all of that. I think it's a good time for us to turn that around and say, what should this police oversight board be collecting? How should we be doing outreach? And making a decision going forward with that, so that's proactive rather than reactive.
Madam Chair, we actually, at our last outreach meeting, we're going to have a special outreach meeting on January the 22nd, where we're going to do kind of what you're talking about, go through goals, objectives, timelines, and figure out, you know, where we need to go and who we are and what we're going to do, you know, where we're headed, if you will.
Well, I think that the ordinance makes it clear. I'd encourage you to look at that again. The whole idea of this is that we 9 citizens cannot represent the entire community. When we started with and if you look at the people who are active, the organizations that are active in this, the mental health community has been very active in this reform process. The homeless community has been very active in that. And the general population needs to be also engaged, and we need to be telling them what's going on here, but we also need to be listening. There's an old saying that says there's a reason God gave us 2 ears and only 1 mouth, and that's why, so that we can listen twice as much as we talk. And that being said, I'm going to stop talking, but I just wanted to bring up that point because it was relevant to Ed's evaluation, and it created a good conversation.
Madam Chairman, you said that the staff would be making recommendations, and I would also think the CPCs would know in each of their different areas where people congregate that outreach might be more effective.
And Amanda's done a lot of work as far as this is concerned, but it's time for there to be an action plan. Mm-hmm. And that's what we got out of the personnel committee meeting. Is that a fair assessment? Wasn't there a third thing? Wasn't there a third piece?
Committee chair check-in.
Say it again?
Committee chair check-in.
Yeah, I think there needs, one of the things we instituted this year was a weekly call between Ed and myself. And the other thought I had was that I think would be helpful, since Ed can communicate with all of us, but we can't do that with each other. You know, the whole mission of this is to enhance communication with the community, but we're limited in how we can talk to each other, which is part of open meetings, and I'm sure it makes sense to somebody, but it's really hard as a communications person to be so limited in how you can communicate. So one of my ideas was, and I talked to Ed about this, is at our weekly meeting, we catch up with each other about everything that we know, that the 2 of us know about. But it occurred to me that we could put that in writing. Ed could send that out as an email to all the board members so that there's a weekly communication from Ed that is about all the pieces. And that allows committee people to jump into that process and share information but it has to come from Ed to us, okay, because of open meetings. Does that make sense? Okay.
Chair.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, and it also gives us an opportunity as a committee to have a one-on-one with Ed or whoever else is on that conversation. Right now, the only conversations we have is when we meet here, so it's a perfect opportunity for that, so I appreciate that. Yeah.
So to me, I can sum it up by just saying we're going from reactive to proactive, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it. I just wanted to call it for what it is. Mr. Cruz, what else do you have?
That is all, Madam Chair. I just wanted to also bring up how we should move forward with a percentage, knowing that we don't know anything from Human Resources or Finance
Well, I
yet.
think we need to know what the limits are. I mean, we can say a magic number. If there's no money to back it up, it's kind of a waste of time. So I think that's why I was asking, how is this determined? We could make a recommendation, all things being equal, and I think that's what we did last year. We said 5%, but it didn't turn out to be 5%, did it, Mr. Harness?
Chair Fine, no, actually. Because there was an automatic 2% increase throughout the city, then the 5 turned into 3. So there was an aggregate of 5.
Okay, so I think we should start with the information from the city and find out what the boundaries are.
Okay.
And do it that way. This board could empower us to move forward with that if you chose to do that. And that way we wouldn't have to wait till next month to come back for a number. Does that make sense? Do we need to vote on
Yeah.
the?
Chair Fine, let me make a motion. I make a motion that we accept the evaluation with the increase to come later on. So that's my motion, that we accept the evaluation as given.
And you empower the personnel committee to negotiate?
Yeah, that's what I said.
Well, later, you said it would come later on, but I just want to say,
Yeah.
Can we just make that deal happen?
Sure.
Okay.
That's my motion.
Okay, I need a second.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign?
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Cruz, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Consent agenda, cases.
Gosh, you're moving pretty fast.
You have it?
You're moving fast. Chair Fine. Item A, the administratively closed cases. I make a motion that we accept those cases as presented.
Second?
I have a second.
Second?
Yeah, second.
Okay. Discussion? Anybody have any cases they want to pull out of this? Let me just tell you that there is a case review committee, and we all get a thing that says, these are the cases, we're going to look at this. An administratively closed case is one that usually is in the wrong venue. So, for example, somebody makes a complaint about a police officer who's a BCSO officer, or they can't identify the officer. They just say, I saw a car, it sped down I-25, and I didn't get a car number or anything, and there's no way to track it. So if there's no way to actually complete an investigation, that's what would cause it to be administratively closed.
Let me ask you this. During this presentation, do you want me to also identify the things that we talked about in that meeting, or does it matter?
Like what? Give me an example, refresh.
Well, example, a couple meetings ago, we talked about things that were missing in the cases that we asked Mr. Harness to get information for us, or those type of things, or things that we identify in our minutes.
Yeah, because if it comes to the agenda and we didn't actually, we're not covering it, we have to say why.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
that's right.
So in going forward in my report, I'll identify those things that we we talk about, so it kind of gives you all an insight on what we discussed, along with input from you all if you have any issues with what we decide to do, so.
So Chantel, the reason is that everybody on the board reads these things. And if you have a concern about any particular letter in any of these listed here, we want you to bring it to us and say, I have a problem with this one, or I don't understand that one. We will have already gone through it, but we may be able to shed some light on your question. But it is not a given that this board will approve what we approve, okay?
Okay. All right, Chair Fine, on item B, cases investigated.
Did we vote? We did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We didn't vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Okay.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yeah.
just as a point of order, because I have not completed the training, some of these agenda items, I'm going to abstain from.
Yes, you have
voting,
to
okay?
abstain until you finish
So
the training.
this would be one of
But we're going to talk
those.
about the training tonight.
Right.
Deputy Chief Garcia is going to talk to us about the training tonight. Cases investigated.
Okay, Chair Fine, I make a motion that the cases investigated be accepted as presented.
Second.
Discussion?
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Okay. Serious use of force, Chair Fine, I make a motion that the cases that are presented are accepted.
Is this where you're going to be talking about these cases?
Right. I should.
Chair Fine, that's correct. I'm prepared to present all three.
So we just reviewed them at our meeting, but we didn't have Mr. Harness's conclusion findings.
Right.
So
Okay.
we're going to get those now.
Chair Fine, honorable board members, case I-48-14. The shooting occurred July 5th of 2013. The multi-jurisdictional investigation team concluded its investigation December 16th of 2013. The Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office ruled on the use of deadly force, finding no criminal charges August 15th of 2015. As to the use of force policy in place at the time, 2-52-3, paragraph B, officers are authorized to use deadly force by any means in order to, 1, protect the officer or others from what is believed to be an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury. 2, prevent the escape of one reasonably believed to have committed a felony, but only when there is probable cause to believe the suspect poses an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. Findings in this case, the CPOA finds Officer B's conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. Findings, the CPOA finds Officer W's conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. The statement of the case. On July 5th, 2013, officers were dispatched to 4601 San Mateo Northeast regarding a black male threatening 2 teenage boys with 2 large knives. Officer B located the subject near the dispatched address. Officer B engaged with the subject, and the subject, armed with the 2 large knives, 1 in each hand, advanced on Officer B. Multiple commands were given to the subject to drop the knives. Those commands were ignored. Officer W arrived on scene and observed the subject advancing towards Officer B. Officer W observed the subject was armed with 2 large knives and advancing towards Officer B. Both officers discharged their service weapons, striking the subject several times. The subject was transported to the hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. I stand for any questions on 4814.
Your finding is that it was an appropriate use of the SOP, use of force?
Yes,
Okay,
the officers are exonerated.
I'm sorry?
The officers are exonerated.
Okay. We should vote one at a time, yes, sir?
Director Harness, help me to understand an allegation of a violation of the SOP. Who alleged it? Who alleged the violation?
Chair Fine, Board Member Ring, the fact that there's an investigation into any of these cases means that there is an underlying allegation, which is why there's an investigation. Some incidents require an investigation, so
it's an
therefore,
automatic.
it's an automatic allegation.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions about this case? Can I have a motion?
Okay, based on the information given and presented, I make a motion that we accept the recommendations from Mr. Harness to exonerate these officers.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Chair Fine, fellow board members, I-119-14. The shooting occurred on December 1st, 2013. The multi-jurisdictional investigative team concluded its investigation April 14th of 2014. The Bernalillo County District Attorney ruled on the use of deadly force July 15th of 2016, finding that there was no criminal act. As in the previous case, the use of force policy was the same. Officers are authorized to use deadly force by any means in order to protect the officer from or others from what is reasonably believed to be an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury, to prevent the escape of one reasonably believed to have committed a felony, but only when there is probable cause to believe the suspect poses an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. The findings. The CPOA finds Officer E conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. The CPOA finds Officer M's conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. The CPOA also finds Officer MC's conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. The statement of the case. On December 1st, 2013, officers responded to a 911 call regarding a man demanding to see his children. The caller stated the subject has a violent history and was wanted on several warrants. The caller suggested, due to the subject's violent past, that 3 officers be dispatched to the call. Officers E, M, and MC were dispatched to the call. The subject fled the scene prior to the arrival of the officers. While searching for the subject, officers were advised to use extreme caution due to the confirmed warrants on the subject and that he had threatened to commit suicide by cop. Officers located the subject near Wyoming and Northeastern Boulevard. Upon officers making contact with the subject, he pulled an object from his waistband, pointing it at officers E and M. Additionally, he began to walk towards them. Officers perceived the object in the subject's hand to be a gun. The subject was commanded to drop the gun. When he refused, officers discharged their service weapons, wounding the subject. I stand for questions.
So again, your finding is that the officers are exonerated?
Yes.
You want to make a motion?
Yeah, I was waiting. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions? No?
Make a motion that we approve as read.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Opposed, same sign? Okay.
Madam Chair, fellow board members, I-70-14. The shooting occurred on October 28th of 2013. The multi-jurisdictional investigative team concluded his investigation December 10th of 2013. The Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office ruled on the use of deadly force August 16th of 2016, finding no criminal charges. The standard was the same. Officers are authorized to use deadly force by any means necessary in order to protect the officers from what is reasonably believed to be an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury. 2, to prevent the escape of one reasonably believed to have committed a felony, but only when there is probable cause to believe the suspect poses an immediate threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. Findings: the CPOA finds Officer P's conduct exonerated regarding the allegation of a violation of this SOP, which means the investigation determined by a preponderance of the evidence that the alleged conduct did occur, but did not violate APD policies, procedures, or training. Statement of the case. On October 28, 2013, officers T and P were dispatched to an automobile accident. An automobile struck a pole at Washington and Central Southeast. The driver of the vehicle was reported to be staggering away from the scene wearing a black shirt, khaki shorts, and armed with a handgun. While en route, dispatch advised officers the driver of the accident vehicle was observed pointing a handgun at a female and a small child standing at a bus stop. Officer P, traveling westbound on Central, observed the subject in black shirt and khaki shorts, engaged in a conversation with a male. Officer P stopped, exited his vehicle, pulled his weapon, and demanded the subject drop the gun. The subject refused and fled on foot. Officer P was able to identify the object in the subject's hand as a gun. Officer P gave chase on foot. The subject stopped, turned toward the officer, raised the gun in the direction of Officer P. Officer P fired his service weapon, wounding the subject. I stand for questions.
Chair Fine, I make a motion that we accept the case as given or as presented by Mr. Harness.
I need a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign? Okay, there was one other.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I have one question, and that is, can you tell me what the timeline was on the investigations for these cases? Does this get to the backlog that was being observed at APD, or was there I'm curious about, since this has been an issue lately with frequency of investigations, was this, or the backlog of investigations that had not been sent over?
I have the backlog right here. That's the next point.
And does that, where do these fall in that category?
Chair Fine, Board Member Dr. Cass, I can tell you that at least 2 of these cases sat at the IRO's office waiting for review, and the previous director did not do the review. And because of civil actions, all of those officer-involved shootings were sent back to, all of those files were sent back to the Internal Affairs Division. And because of changing processes, they are now coming for review. 2 of these cases weren't reviewed or finished being reviewed until 2016 by the District Attorney's Office. The first case, I-4814, was cleared by the District Attorney's Office in August of 2015. The backlog is not universally APD's issue. The IRO and the POC, not really the POC because they had no control over what would come before them, but the previous IRO refused to do this work and did not bring these cases and did not do the review. When the materials were there for her to do the review, they simply sat in her office and it was not done.
So we are catching up with that backlog. And just as a reminder, we have made a commitment. There was a suggestion at one point that we draw a line in the sand and said anything that was before this, we're not investigating, we're just going from this point forward. We voted as a board that was inappropriate because there was a reason we were put together was to review these cases, and the time element, it just shouldn't matter. We should still weigh in on it. And so we went through all of the investigations. This is some of that backlog that was formed by the inactivity of the IRO. There are other reasons, and these are more of them. These are the serious use of force cases, of which we now have, and they will be on SafeLink. Are they already? No, they won't. Where will these board members be able to get this?
Chair Fine, based upon the decision of the Case Review Subcommittee,
Right,
I will be putting
on ShareLink.
I will be putting that on SharePoint for
SharePoint, there you
access for all of the board members. In the 3-month increment that you requested.
So there's 24, 26 cases here. We're going to do them in thirds. These take a lot of time to review all these. So we're going to do the first one. We will review a case review in January, which is before the board meeting in January. And we will be prepared to make recommendations to you. That information will be available for you to review. These are serious use of force cases, and I would urge you to go through them. The case review committee decided that we would do these 26 cases in thirds. So we'll do the first third in January, the second third in February. By March, we'll be done. That's a lot of commitment of time to get this done. And even if you can't vote, I would say to you, read it anyway, because it's worthwhile to learn how this works. We also sent back some cases at the last case review committee, not this one, but the one before. And I would tell you that it was better, but there were still some pages that are upside down and Post-it notes that are on top of something so you can't see it. It still needs work. So I would ask APD to, when you send these things to us, make sure that they are legible and organized in some fashion that we can actually get through them. It's hard enough to do it with it being confusing on top of it. So that's what I wanted to make sure that you are aware of too. So you'll see that's on SharePoint, the link to it, and we'll do them in the third chunks that we talked about. Any questions about that? Yes, sir.
Chair Fine, this seems like an odd use of consent agenda. I mean, I'm not against the fact that we've heard these cases, but the use of consent agenda is unless someone on the board decides to lift something from the consent agenda to be discussed, you just simply vote.
Well, the assumption is that the case review committee is making a recommendation that these can be accepted as they are because of the
Correct.
That's
So
why they're on the case.
I'm not objecting to Director Harness reading this, but
Oh, I see
don't
what
put it
you're
on a
saying.
consent agenda.
Okay, that could be a point. We could not make that because his recommendations weren't done at the
Okay.
time of our committee meeting.
Okay.
So we weren't able to see those. We
Sure.
all agreed at the case review committee that we thought that the cases were within policy, but we were waiting for this meeting to get Mr. Harness's recommendations.
Chair Fine, I think it is a distinction that Board Member Dr. Ring is correct, that it should have been a separate agenda
line
item removed out of the consent agenda and simply a different standalone item so that it's not confusing that there were already findings in this case for everyone, all of the board members to review as a part of the package, which is not the case in these 3 cases, where there are findings for all of the other cases that are on the consent agenda.
Okay, so then we should pull it out, and you'll make sure Michelle's got that right.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that observation. Are there any other questions about the cases or moving forward, how this works? Are we all good? Okay.
I had one question. In the format, this format is different now that the statement of the case is now at the back after the findings. Is that just a new format, or how did that come to? It seems counterintuitive.
Chair Fine, Board Member Cruz, that's how I've done
Oh, okay.
the last few of them. Probably at least the last 4 or 5 that I presented.
Disregard them.
Are we ready to move on?
Chair Fine.
The review of Garrity material, you
Oh,
have
I
a
was just
question
going
now?
to say that I really like this format. It's much easier for me to follow, and it gives me the information I need. Thank you.
The review of Garrity materials, do we know of?
Chair Fine, I have no cases for you at this time.
Okay. Reports from subcommittees. Dr. Ring, Community Outreach Committee, Subcommittee.
Our Community Outreach Subcommittee met on December 7th, 1 week ago, and we were at full strength, welcoming a new member thereof, and Ms. St. John, and glad to have her as part of things. We were able to report some genuine outreach because several of us attended some CPC meetings. And I think there were actually 3 of the 6 CPCs that were attended, and we reported, what we learned from them. And so, we're gradually moving beyond the basement of 600 North 2nd to actually get out among the interested parties. And we've made plans for additional meetings with both CPCs and for community center meetings. So those things are upcoming. We elected a new chair as of January 1st in Mr. Johnny J. Armijo, since I'll be soon disappearing, and looking forward to his leadership. And we're going to have a special lengthy meeting on January 22nd of this subgroup to flesh out some of the goals, objectives, and timelines of what we hope to accomplish in 2018 and beyond. And that's basically it.
So you said you met with some CPCs and you listened and heard some things. Could you share with us what you heard?
Well, they were each a little bit different. Dr. Cass met with 2 of them. I met with the Valley CPC myself, and it meets at the Police Academy, which tells you something to begin with. There were about 20 persons present. About half of them were uniformed officers, about half were civilians. The sole item of the evening was a presentation of about 90 minutes by one of our senior ADAs, Assistant District Attorneys, about the crime epidemic in Albuquerque. And he had some slides and, some very interesting points. But other than that, there was no discussion. We just listened.
Okay.
So that was that. But Dr. Cass, if you would report on your experiences.
Well, I'm trying to remember which CPC it was at last, or at that you're referring to.
One was Southeast.
Yes, and I think that was where, that was the one Dr. Browder and I attended. And at that time, I made contact with the Sergeant Roger Legendre, who's has the community and police together outreach team. And I've followed up with him and a meeting with a couple other members from the police department in the southeast to talk about their community outreach. And actually, I also used it to arrange a ride-along, which is finally coming up. But in any case, I'll talk more about what I think we might do with outreach, but I think it's useful to, find out what APD is doing as well as in their own outreach programs, as well as the CPCs, what the public is trying to do. And so I'll leave it at that.
That's our report, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
We have one additional. On January the 10th, we're going to meet with the Southwest area CPCs. That's scheduled already.
Okay, thank you. Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee, Dr. Cass.
I have several items, and it doesn't quite follow the format of discussing strictly what's on Policy 341.
That's just one that, when I was putting the agenda together, I knew that one was one, so I didn't have
Okay, so
anything else.
I
You're
tried.
not limited to this.
Right, okay. Well, the approach I've taken recently is to try to put together a list of sort of what I call loose ends and see where we are with respect to policy. And I think I've kind of shopped this list around, and in fact, when I bump into somebody who might be interested, I give them a copy and let them go away with it. And I did that with Mr. Schmiel from the City Attorney's Office, and I think he may have something to say about that later. But I'm trying to get a comprehensive look at what it is that we should be doing in terms of policy. And I think the first thing on at the top of our list is to integrate our policy process with APD's policy process. And I think that means that we have to address, or in some committee form or some working group form, how we're going to get those two policy development processes meshed together. And they have an SOP which deals with this. It's 352. It's been a long time in being created. There's been certain objections to it from the DOJ, and we've struggled to find a particular place to enter into that process, and I think we need to look at it, look at various entry points other than just the Office of Policy Analysis, which is the suggested point. There's also places where we need to be in the loop to review what has come out of there. So in doing that, I've looked at, in going to OPA meetings, I've talked to the OPA people who run the meeting and developed a connection there so that we can exchange information. And as I mentioned, I think in the last meeting, they're trying to open up the OPA process to invite more members of the public to participate, and we'll see how that goes. But I think there's been a change in tone about how policies are going to be introduced, and I think we're closer to getting a special place into that policy process. But so I think that's an ongoing thing, but I think we need to set up a working group meeting that deals with the DOJ concerns as well as our concerns and APD's existing policy process. So
It occurs to me that, and perhaps Deputy Chief Garcia can speak to this when he visits with us, but we had set up something that we thought would work, and of course these changes have occurred. And so Major Tyler, who was helping us before, is now no longer with the department. So one of the things we had set up was that having a leader from the police department, in that case Major Tyler, and our committee chairs have a regular meeting with them so that we could have an overarching the big conversation of how do we meld those things. In particular, that was one of them. And now that Major Tyler's not here, and perhaps when you come up to speak, Deputy Chief Garcia, you can speak to that. Maybe there's somebody else, but I think it needs to be the chair and the committee chairs of the POB talking on a regular basis with the leadership of APD, and to see how do we make these things happen, because we're often floundering trying to figure out who's the right person at APD to talk to about this, and then it becomes a piecemeal thing. And that's, like I said, it's a reactive pose instead of a proactive pose. So perhaps that either meeting with Chief Geyer or Deputy Chief Garcia, somebody in at that level needs to meet with us and help us figure out how we go about these things.
Yes.
Does that help?
So, so to continue with this, the other approach that I've taken is to deal with the specific mentions of APD in the ordinance and identify policies that where we need data, for example. And so I've been working with Diane McDermott, our investigator, who's an expert on SOPs. She's been around a while, and she knows what she's doing in this area, and I really value her input into the process. And she has been primarily responsible for identifying the SOPs that might be useful and to make our, to create a position for us to receive data or whatever the appropriate thing is. And the ones that we've identified are SOP 341, which is the complaints involving department policy or personnel, and we're suggesting that they modify this SOP to furnish that, to show a contact to furnish that particular, to furnish the data. And this deals with cases, and so there's case kind of data that comes over, or that's involved here. And I think rather than recommend specific language, what we need to do is let APD decide on the particular language. We need to know what the purpose is that we're trying to, or what changes we're trying to make in a general sense. But I think the actual language as to how they're going to include us may be up to them in some cases. In some cases, I think we can also specify the language, but.
So you're really looking at guiding principles as opposed to, in a particular SOP.
Right.
As opposed to the actual sentence structure.
That's correct. And I mean, that gets ironed out in the OPA and PPRB. At least that's the kind of discussion that's involved there. And of course, it can get modified somewhere else along the process, and there's a little bit of non-transparency in the process, so it's not clear where all the changes might occur. You look like you're about to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chairman Fine, Mr. Cass, I was going to suggest that I think those overall arching go in the beginning part where it talks about the purpose of the policy, but there's so much, I feel, slippage when it gets down to actually implementation that I think there is a role, my opinion, that for us really to look at it line by line, how it's going to be carried out, not the grammar or maybe redundancies that could be there, but I think it's truly worthwhile to have a plan for all the steps in a policy.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
So there's a number of others that we've identified, such as the 344, SOP 344, which is review of completed administrative investigation cases where the CPOA's CASA-defined role in reviewing use of force cases, access to data, maintained by Internal Affairs, and the chief's duty to respond to the CPOA POB recommendations. So that's the policy that deals with the timeline associated with the response, and it also deals with delivery of data and access to use of force cases. And I primarily kept in Internal Affairs Division, and I think it's, but we need to get some specifics about how that is handled.
And are there things, may I ask a question, sir?
Yes.
Are there things within the list of things you're talking about that have not been presented to the board? Or have all of them been presented to the board on previous occasions and you're just trying to get it done with them?
I think they haven't all been presented to the board, and they haven't necessarily all been discussed in committee, but we've had some general discussions about implementing various aspects of the ordinance in committee, and we've gone through that in some way, in some manner, and it's not complete. But I think at this point we can introduce ideas into OPA and the PPRB that don't require approval of the board. If we want to make it a more formal process, we need to have a board approval and a letter to the chief.
Well, the worry that I have is that there's 3 or 4 members of your committee, and policy is supposed to be 51% of what the board does. So if the board isn't, I would have a problem if a policy or an idea, even if it's guiding principles like you say, I think they should be discussed by this body before they go anywhere else. Let's make sure we have consensus among ourselves before we go somewhere else. And that's to me the way that we'll learn what works and what doesn't work and all of that. I think we started out in the weeds of the grammar, and now I hear you saying we would need to do this, and I hear Dr. Brown saying we still need to make sure the weeds are okay. I understand that, but I don't understand why we would take suggestions on policy changes from the committee to implementation without the board approving it first.
And I don't think that's what is happening. I think what we're trying to do is to get, anyone, including any member of the board, any member of the public, can make policy recommendations to APD. And I think it's the ones that are maybe possibly controversial, but whoever, that I think your board approval would need to be made. But I think if APD were to decide that something that we recommended had merit, it wouldn't be up to us to have to approve that as a board.
Yeah, I'm just making sure that what we give to them is something we all agree to.
And I think that then it becomes a logistical problem of how do we get that discussion.
Well, I envision, and maybe I'm the only one that thinks this way, y'all jump in.
No, I
this,
agree
but-
with you. It needs to come to the board before it goes.
So in the way that the case review committee, for example, we could say, it's possible that we could say the administrative closed cases, we don't need to bring them to the board. Well, I disagree with that. I think everything has to come to the board. So the way I envision this would be you making in your report a presentation that says, here are the policies we want to move forward and where we are with them in particular. So this is a new policy and these are the guiding principles that we want to see the committee has discussed and would like to go forward. And so here's what we're presenting to y'all for a vote. And that doesn't mean that it is cast in stone or all the work's done, but in principle, we agree with whatever your committee has decided to, or not. We have a discussion and we decide the board doesn't vote in favor of it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree. This is fine here because I'm on the board with you, and us 3 or 4 should not be making that decision. It should be the full board should make that decision.
I think that if you look at the ordinance, that's what the ordinance says. 51% of what the board does is got to be policy related. So to my way of thinking, I understand getting out of the weeds and trying to start a conversation, but I think that your committee, again, doesn't have to be reactive, can be proactive and say, let's say you start with the CASA, the SOPs that affect the CASA. So you start with that, or you start with the list you already have, and you say, you come to the board and you say, here's what we've discussed, and here's our recommendation going forward. And the board votes on it, and then you go forth and prosper, and the next time that we meet together, you tell us what's up with that. You know, that to me is how this should work, and y'all jump in and tell me.
I agree, I totally agree. Yeah, it has to be, should be the board approved.
Yeah, I think it's the way all the committees have to work, frankly. Otherwise, it isn't an activity of the board, it's an activity of the committee. You know, and that's not enough. All of us are charged with working on policy. But in the way that the case review committee digs into the case and reads every single thing of every single one, we still ask the board members to go through the cases and jump in with us, or not, or object or whatever. So I really think the process, we keep coming back to this, and I think the process has to be agreed on. I don't know. Do you all want a motion? What do you want to do?
I think we do.
Madam
have a
Chairman.
motion on the table.
Go right ahead.
That all the, let's see, how do I want to word this? That during our policy meetings, all recommendations that are going to move forward have to come before the complete vote before the full board.
In a presentation of
In a presentation,
rationale and
yes,
why you're doing this and all of that, and then the board votes on
The
it?
vote, yeah, we vote on it. 'cause
And
we're-
then that's your go sign, your green light to go ahead, and we're behind you, you know, and the committee.
Yeah, right.
So
I'll
I need a
sec-
second for that.
I second that.
Okay. Now, everybody chime in here. I want to hear from everybody on this, because I feel like I'm the only one talking now.
No, I want to hear what Dr. Cass thinks about that motion.
Okay.
How do you feel about it?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a logistical problem with that. And I think that at some point, and I think before it gets to, I mean, there's some things in the SOPs which are relatively minor, which we can be interested in seeing the change, and but it shouldn't have to require full board approval. It can go through with the knowledge of the board. But sitting on the OPA or PPRB committee, you know, this is a dynamic situation, and if a change, one of the things, the obligations, as I understand it, of the person, the representative, and I think this is an important point, is that I, as a policy and procedures chair, represent the board on the PPRB, and so that means that you've delegated the authority to, you know, make these suggestions or recommendations to the PPRB. I think in terms of the OPA, it's less of a formal process. There's a discussion about the changes that are made. Those things they're dynamic, and they're not something that all the board is going to weigh in on. I think if you want progress, there needs to be a communication among the board in real time. I mean, much more frequently than once a month, in order to make serious changes, or to make changes in general.
I got a
So-
question.
Well, Dr. Cass, I understand logistics, but once again, I will reiterate, it needs to go to the full board. We shouldn't be passing things like that without anyone having knowledge of what we're doing on that committee.
So how do you suggest that we get the information, even if we do what you're talking about doing? How do we get that information back to us? Somehow that's got to be communicated, somehow it's got to be done in a report format, so we can see what actions you've done, even if we decide that's how you're going to proceed. So how do I get that information back? That's important to me. I
Madam-
understand you going out and making these changes, blah, 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 blah. But how do I know about those changes that you made? Any suggestions?
Madam
Well-
Chair? Oh,
I'd like to hear from,
yeah, I think we're discussing a policy nightmare, unless we can really nail down some details. When we go to the policy meetings, like Dr. Cass said, it's a dynamic meeting. Things change while you're sitting there. New information comes in and things get chewed on. So it would be certainly possible to come back and give people reports, but I don't think we can stop, I don't think we have a right actually to stop
Stop the
APD's process because we're going to be meeting in another month. I mean, I think
Right.
that's beyond the,
So what about the
that's
weekly
not
updates
polite.
that we talked about before?
Well, wait a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not quite finished. So, and I think another thing that we might be able to do would be from OPA or PPRB, we could put out the policies that are going to be discussed and the dates that are coming up. And Vicki Duran has done that and has given us those coming up for January, for example. And then by email, anyone could then get in touch with Dr. Cass or whoever else might be going to the policy meetings. But there are huge agendas on these, and some of the policies have many pages to them. So it's really a commitment, but it's part of the 51%.
Yeah.
I think it's a possibility that everyone would put input in, but I don't think we will be able to have the final comments on the final bill unless we end up with a new system where the policy comes to us at the very last step, and then we could make the comment, the final comment then. But
I understand the dynamics of those meetings. I've been to a couple of them. The only concern I have is reporting back to the board and getting that information distributed to everyone on those conclusions or those things that were decided upon. That's what I'm looking for. Now, you say we have an agenda, she puts out an agenda, maybe we could report on those things that were on the agenda as a final report. What happened
yeah,
in
that
those
would
cases.
be possible.
Well,
That's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for, to make the decision on what we should present or what we can't present, because I understand the dynamics of what those committees do, so.
well, if I can respond to that, I think there's an analogy to what the city council does, and that is, as members of this board, we represent some constituency, whether it's and it's independent. We're not a group of people that have been appointed to all do the same thing. And I can have a view of what this group should do as a member, just like a city councilman can promote a particular bill or introduce a bill. And that doesn't mean that the whole board, the whole city council has to approve that bill before it can be, furthered. That ends up at the very end of the process of whether you get support for your bill or not. Well, this is equivalent to an action that that we take on a board. It's an individual action that we, in order to be successful in the end, it may very well does need all the support of the board. But another point here is we don't own the APD policy process. And so all we do is we make recommendations to that process, and our success can be measured by whether they accept our recommendations. But they're not obligated to accept any of our recommendations, as we've seen up till now. And so this is more like a soccer game than a basketball game. Most of the time you go down the field, you don't score. And I think that's part of the issue here. So, but I don't see that this is an individual. This is every action that needs to be done here needs to be done with the approval of the board. So,
Mr. Harness?
Chair Fine, fellow board members, I think part of the confusion here is goes to Dr. Brown's point regarding the failure of APD to present you with a finished policy product. And I think that there needs to be a distinction between participation in OPA, PPRB, and SOPRC as a delegate of the POB or the CPOA to participate in those processes versus a policy recommendation that comes out of the subcommittee. When at PPRB and OPA, you're not acting on behalf of the board. You're there as a member, invited as a voting member as APD. You simply have your role as a POB member. And so that's the distinction. If the subcommittee wanted to make a recommendation at OPA, then that recommendation would have to come in front of the full board for the approval. The other confusion here is that the settlement agreement and the ordinance were written, and then APD invented the policy writing procedures that they developed after criticism from the monitor. And so they instantaneously developed and created the Office of Policy Analysis. And so that's where all the layers of confusion come in. And I think that this body should fundamentally act under the ordinance. If you have policies that you want to make recommendations and write in those policies, for example, to say the chief must answer a non-concurrence and discipline in 30 days. And if you want to write that in the policy, write it in the policy and refer it over and do it in accordance with the ordinance and let APD deal with it within their processes. And if the chief wants to say, well, I sent it to OPA, and if the board wants to say that's satisfactory answer, then the board can decide whether or not they want to accept it. The ordinance says, in 45 days, we've made a policy recommendation, did you take it or not? And if you didn't, why not? And that's where fundamentally you need to act, and all the nuances, let those work themselves out. But fundamentally, you need to operate under the ordinance.
I agree 100%. My only concern, and hopefully everybody else's concern, is understanding what you're presenting or what you're getting out of it. You see what I mean? Somehow you have to report back to this board and let us know what policies are being talked about or discussed and what conclusions came out of that, you know. Does that make sense? And that's just a report back. It's not a formal anything, you know. I just want to know what you're doing and what the conclusion was.
Well, and I think things that I'm doing as a policy, chair are distinct, and this is, I would keep the board informed about that. Okay. But I think knowing what APD is doing in their policy process is, that's something that APD can inform us of, and they do that. Yeah. But I mean, that's not, like I said, we don't own the process, and so I think it's appropriate for us to have a discussion about the recommendations that we make. And in some cases, APD can be, you can make an an informal recommendation to APD, and APD can take it and go with it. And I've got an example of this that I'd like to talk about. But
I guess the key thing is, what are those recommendations? Yeah. How do we know about those? And not that we want to react to them or act on them. How do we know what's being discussed?
I don't see where in this process we get educated about what's happening in policy between us and APD. I don't see how the board gets educated in the process we have right now.
So that's where I going back to my original discussion is, how can we get that information back? And how you're working it is probably fine, and then Dr. Brown has been doing it for the last 3 years, and I understand what she's going through. But how do we get that information back here?
How do we learn from it?
And we can inform you. I mean, there are a couple. I mentioned 341 and 344. There's some we have some suggested language for, that we'd like to, have APD consider for us. We can, we were intending to circulate that suggested language, but there was a cross-up as to when we were going to circulate that. It'll come out, as soon as we can do it, this week, it'll come, in the case of 344, I think it was, which is some language that Diane McDermott suggested for their, for that SOP, to include, getting information, data from the APD to us, or to
So-
CPOA.
Let me recap what I think I heard, okay? So I'm hearing you say, and Ed say to some extent, that you two are representatives in the APD process of policy development. So that's the OPA, that's all the other alphabet soup things. But in addition to that, the committee is dealing with issues that they may be generating themselves. That the committee is looking at and saying, we're going to bring this to APD, we're not reacting to something in a dialogue way, we are bringing our own suggestion. Is that correct so far?
That's correct, and I think that we can make suggestions, as any of us can as members of the public, to APD. If you want a formal suggestion that goes to the chief, which is where the formal process is, then that requires a board approval. But I think to make a minor suggestion and to do it dynamically at the meeting, I mean that's something that the
So
board
I'm
isn't going to
seeing
do.
a
But if
distinction
it's a suggestion
yeah.
that is more substantial, then I agree that the board should see that.
Well, even your input in the dynamic fashion, and the same thing with Mr. Harness, I still want to know that happened. I want to know what's the result. I mean, you may not have to tell me every single sentence, but I want to hear, I want the board to hear in your report, this is, we met with them, we were discussing this policy, and we ended up at this place. This is how we participated in the conversation, and this is what I'm bringing back to you so you can learn. That's one set of things. That's you at OPA and all of that stuff. And the policy committee is dealing with that and more in terms of policy recommendations, where we're initiating a policy recommendation.
It appears that.
Am I hearing it right?
I'm just going to say, it appears our attorney has his finger on the button there.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Waiting to go.
Chair Fine and board members, I wanted to comment on a couple of things that I've heard in this discussion. I also want to just note that there is still a motion pending.
Yes.
So that this discussion has potential Open Meetings Act implications. I think Director Harness made what's a fairly crucial distinction between a situation where a member of the board or the director of the board is a representative on another policy-making body, where on that policy-making body that member represents the POB constituency, and the actions of a committee of the board. This issue has come up a number of times. The committees of the board are not subject to the Open Meetings Act because they don't constitute a quorum of the board, and because they are fact-finding bodies that simply execute the policy or the final actions of the board. Once a committee starts taking actions that practically or legally bind the board, then that committee would likely be construed to be a policy-making body, at which point it would be subject to the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. And while the committees have properly abided by those requirements as a matter of good policy, but not as a matter of legal requirement, if a committee starts taking actions that bind the board as a whole, then it will likely be found to be a policy-making body under the Act and have to comply fully with the Act under all circumstances. The comment about email traffic for comments to move this process is perhaps not the best idea because of the rolling quorum problems associated with emails among board members. Again, the entire board or a quorum of a board doesn't need to be copied on an email. If there are a series of emails between members who are not a quorum that then adds up to a quorum, then there's a potential legal problem there. So I'd advise against that.
But isn't that really about voting? I mean, aren't we able for example, before I talked about having a weekly email that went out to the board from Ed that said, this is the information, that this is what's going on. It isn't asking for a vote, it isn't asking for a conclusion, it's just updating you for this week's activities.
Communication.
Right, it's just communication, there's no voting involved. But it makes it easier for us to, when we do meet once a month, that we have more information that we already got ahead of time. And it's not coming as a dump truck full of information 3 days before our board meeting. I'm just saying, there's a lot of parts to this, and the communication roadblocks for this are significant. And I'm trying to find a path to yes. I mean, I'm trying to find a path to yes.
Chair Fine, the email you discussed from the director, sort of a weekly update, is fine for a couple of reasons that I think distinguish it between the suggestion of emails that was made earlier during the discussion. One is it's not coming from a board member, it's coming from staff, and it's going to the board. It's a one-way communication. The email suggestion that I heard earlier in the discussion appeared to be something else, where there would be an announcement of some kind, and then there would be feedback via email. That's where the potential rolling quorum problem is.
Let me just say this. When we set up the subcommittees and we created a chairperson and we said, Dr. Cass, you go out and represent us, we're giving you that voice, okay? The other part of that, we need that voice to come back and tell us what you said. Does that make sense? We need to know what's...
There has to be a feedback loop
Yeah.
for us.
And now that feedback doesn't have to be an email. It doesn't have to be an email to everybody. It can be part of a report to the body, okay? That's what I'm looking for. I don't, I'm not looking for a detailed, this is what I'm presenting. Do we need to vote on it? No. We gave you that voice as the chair to go out and represent this body. Does that make sense?
Well, what's the job of the other committee members then?
Well, they should be part of that, too. They should be part of that discussion. You don't go and just make a decision based on your opinion. This is what I'm presenting, this is what I'm doing, and you guys decide what you can present, report back to us what you presented. I mean, it's just that simple. I'm not looking for a whole formal, let's vote on it before you do
But
that.
there can't be no feedback. There has to be
Right.
some way in which this board is engaged, even if it isn't permission. It's a reporting of what occurred and what are the results. That's really what we're doing here. And all the committees is what happened.
Right.
Eric spent a lot of time on the personnel part of this, making calls, and did he lay out every single detail? No. But you got the summation of what happened. And the same thing is true with case review. You got a summation of what happens. So that's what I'm talking about. And I understand participating in the OPA and the other things, but at some point there has to be a connection with the committee, and there has to be a connection with the board. And unless there is, then we have a policy of one.
Well, and let me respond to that, and that is that communicate, I think there has been no formal, I have not made any formal recommendations. And I think the board has, has right of prior approval before any formal recommendations are made. But I think there's a lot of informal recommendations that are made, and they don't, and they can be very informal, but they need, in a sense, they need to be, they need support from not only this board, but other, the other people in the process that are involved in the process, including the public and APD if they're going to be successful. That's a political process, and it's not, it's the kind of thing that occurs, in meetings and conversations, and it's very difficult to make any kind of a report on that, and I'm not sure that it's even appropriate, given that as individuals.
We have to come to some conclusion about this.
But I think there is. I mean, I think what's important here is to draw is to make the distinction between the formal, kinds of things that this board is tasked with doing, and and having accountability from the policy process for those things. But for the informal process, this is a sausage making process. I don't think that, I don't know how to describe that. And so if you have an idea of how to do that, I'd be interested, but I think
Well,
there's
we
two,
have a
there's two,
motion on the floor,
there's two
so-
parts to this, so.
I think we've gotten that part. Mr. Cruz, Chantel, do you have any?
I do. The only thing that I would say, that I would recommend, is that the motion be amended to not be specifically about the policymaking committee, but all subcommittees as a whole, that any kind of major formal recommendation should come to the board and not be done on a committee level, subcommittee level.
Is that an amendment you're willing to make on your motion?
Yeah, so all of them would have to come through.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's making a distinction about informal things, like participating in a meeting and being able to speak out loud, while he's representing the POB in that, but would still involve the committee, and it would still involve the board in terms of letting us know what's going on.
I'm saying the spirit of this discussion, not the
Yes, but
specificalities
yeah.
of this particular, but the spirit of this, that it be on the committees as a whole.
Mr. Cruz, do you have anything you want to add?
I don't feel like we should vote on that because that's already, I feel that's
Already the thing.
that's
Yeah,
how a
it's already
subcommittee
done.
works.
Yeah.
It's a motion, so.
So we can cancel the motion if we want to.
I personally think the motion should be withdrawn.
Yeah, I'll
It's too
withdraw.
vague.
Yeah.
Mr.
That's fine,
Mr.
yeah.
Armijo?
Just an example, on the 22nd, we're going to go over goals, objectives for the outreach committee. Now, in my mind, we do that. We come back to the board. We say, these are the goals, these are the objectives, these are the timelines. What do you think? And then we get input from the board, and then we go rock and roll. Is that what we're looking at? Just so that I'm clear?
That's
Okay.
how the other committees work.
Right.
And so I would just say that I think that, you've gotten a lot of feedback here from this group, and we've withdrawn the motion. I just think that there has to be a way, and perhaps you and Mr. Harness can talk about that. I think that it's important for me. I think it's important that we stop just reacting to what APD is doing, and that we make policy recommendations of our own that are based in the cases or based in the things we're learning. If we don't learn from you, we can't make those recommendations. And that's the concern I have. So we have to figure out a way, and perhaps we're not going to do it tonight, but we need to figure out a way that all the committees bring their work product back and teach the rest of us through that process. Otherwise, we're not a board, we're parts, and we're moving all around.
Yeah, I recommend at this point that you just said Dr. Cass talks to Director Harness, and that you put it on the agenda for next month so we can have some clarification
Of how we're gonna do
How
this.
we're going to do this.
Going forward. Okay, that's a good recommendation.
I'll second that.
Okay, well, it doesn't need to be a motion.
That was not a motion.
So that's okay.
Recommendation.
All right, thank you. The next, Dr. Cass, do you have anything else on your report that you wanted to cover?
Well, I'll try to keep this short, but as you may recall, as a result of the Victoria Martin's investigation that Paul Scottsdale presented, one of the recommendations from his presentation was that, or from his findings in an investigation, was that APD and the CYFD have a better method of coordinating a handoff between the two agencies for cases such as this. And I have and this was something that we tried to follow up on in terms of a policy I think I was given some instructions to that we should make a recommendation to APD, or that Paul Scottsdale in our committee was to look into best practices for this. Well, we had a previous report that this had, nothing had been found that could be, that we could really, get a grasp on. But at the most recent agenda that came out for the next OPA meeting in January, it was included in here as an agenda item for considering that very handoff, the policy APD to CYFD handoff. And I inquired from the OPA facilitator how that had come about, and it turns out that APD did this on their own, and there's an email chain here, which is from Jeremy McCrae to Bill Slauson and Adam Garcia, saying the chief would like the attached suggestions to be addressed in the policy process with the input of the Crimes Against Children unit. The excerpt is from a POB CPOA compliant response letter to the CPC 93-17. So the chief got the message from the report, and then it went through the email chain, and it's bounced back and forth, and after 6 emails, it was put on the agenda for the next OPA meeting for discussion.
Which would be a great thing for us to learn about when we come back together in January. It'd be great to find out what happened.
I agree, and what happens, and as I mentioned, this is basically now their process, and we sit on, as members, in very much a minority on these boards, and the process is still very much in their control. And I think one of the places that we need to deal with this is to get a better place at the table, and in a more acknowledged place, a position in this policy-making process. But that requires this negotiation that we've talked about with APD. So that's all I have.
Okay. Case review.
Okay.
Mr. Waits?
As far as the case review, we met.
Wait a minute. She's saying that this policy 341, that's the timeline. We needed a timeline for that because I think there's a time-sensitive nature to that. 341?
Turn your mic on.
I'm sorry. Oh.
No, him.
Director Cass, do you have that information? Director Harness, do you have that information, sir?
Chair Fine, Board Member St. John. 3-41 was tabled at OPA.
What is it? Tell us what it is.
3-41 is dealing with thank you, complaints involving department personnel, department policy or personnel. So it involves the investigation of administrative complaints, including civilian complaints that we investigate. It was before OPA, and I moved that it be tabled in order for the board to make the recommendations that they wanted to make. And so OPA would be looking for that policy to come back to them because it is a CASA-related policy, and they would be looking for that to come back to them in January. So if there's going to be recommendations, then the subcommittee needs to meet, write those recommendations, and bring them to the board in the January meeting.
And that will be before the clock runs out?
There wasn't a definitive time. but because it is an OPA-related policy and looking at the timelines for the POB,
An OPA, you mean a CASA-related policy?
I'm sorry, because it is a CASA-related policy, that is at OPA. They want it sooner rather than later. And I told them that the soonest that they could expect it would be January, based upon the timelines of the subcommittee and the POB.
Okay, so has that been discussed at the committee?
No, it hasn't. So Dr. Cass, will we be able to make that available and ready by January the 11th, our next meeting?
Well, the OPA meeting is January 10th,
January 10th?
so we aren't meeting before, our policy
maybe you
meeting
need to.
does not meet before then.
Yeah, but then even if we meet and make the changes, we need to vote on it, right?
Chair Fine, we're not tied to OPA's next meeting date, but it's incumbent upon the board to, if they want to make recommendations, to do them as expeditiously as possible so that they will be considered by OPA before the department decides to move on and adopt the policy as they see it so they can get it to the monitor. I mean,
Okay,
the reality is that this is a CASA-related policy, and while I was able to table it, they're not going to wait forever. So as soon as this board can make its recommendations, the better.
Okay, so we need recommendations, and we need a process to get that done before the 10th of January. No?
No, by the, I guess,
No, Chair Fine, we're not tied to OPA's schedule, but my point is that we need to get it done
So
By the
on the
11th.
as
11th,
soon
their
as
committee
possible,
can meet and
so
make
that-
recommendations?
so that the subcommittee needs to define, to write what recommendations and changes that they want to make so they can bring them to your next meeting, and then you can,
In January?
in January, then you can send those, and it could
Okay.
be at APD
Okay.
for the
Yes.
review process.
Dr. Cass, is there a problem with that getting done?
when's our next meeting in January?
It's,
Is there a problem getting that done before our next board meeting?
no, I mean, we've talked, I mean, I've looked at this and I've written some language, I've asked some questions, and I've talked with Diane McDermott about this as well. So we just need to determine how specific a language we want to
Okay,
include here.
can I have a copy of that, please? A copy of it?
Yeah, these are available on,
Okay. So I'll get a copy and
Okay,
review that.
so my question is, your committee will deal with this and come to us at our January meeting with something specific
yes,
to offer?
yes.
Okay, that's what I need to know.
The next policy subcommittee meeting is on the 21st of December.
21st, okay.
Okay.
So you want to put that?
All right.
We'll
Yeah,
work,
right.
if we can spend the whole meeting
What
working
is
on it,
that?
that'd be
It's
good.
your phone. Okay, are we done with that? We have a commitment to get that to us? Okay. Mr. Waits?
For the sake of time, the case review committee met December 5th at the Plaza del Sol building. There was discussion about the Victoria Martins case, which Mr. Loxton mentioned briefly. Mr. Loxton did withdraw his public recommendation for the case to be audited. So Member Fine concluded that the case review board is on notice and suggested that the assessment of non-concurrence cases be part of the semi-annual report. Okay. And that's pretty much all I had, other than the cases that were reviewed and voted upon and were presented tonight, so.
Yeah, and this item C2 is really what we talked about before with the third, and
Right,
third.
So I didn't want to repeat
Gotcha.
a lot of the stuff that we had talked about. Our next meeting, did you all discuss?
Mhm,
that?
we did.
Tuesday, January 2nd, at 10 a.m.
Yeah. Okay, we could, we have, it's at 10 minutes of 7. Do you want to break for dinner and come back? Or do you want to at least hear from Deputy Chief Garcia?
I would like to recommend breaking for dinner. I've been to the FEMA training for 3 days solid.
Okay, so you're
and I'm
starting. Okay, then we're gonna, well, I don't think we have any attorney stuff to do, right? So we don't have to
Chair
do that.
Fine, that's correct.
Okay, so then whoever wants to join us for supper, you can come with
You
us.
don't want the chief to do this?
No, they just said no. Okay, so we're gonna go have some supper and come right back. That is quite,
Mr. Ed Harness.
okay, we're ready, we're back. Reports from city staff. Oh, yeah, that's right. Reports from city staff, APD. Deputy Chief Garcia, will you come join us? Hi.
Chair Fine, board members. Good afternoon. Good evening, sorry. I'm Deputy Chief Garcia. I'm in charge of the new Compliance Bureau that just came out today. I have Sarita Nair, the new CAO, here with me. She's also going to speak about the new organizational chart. I just want to say a few words about my new job. I'm excited to be doing this. I think I've worked with some of you before. They've given me a lot of authority, which I'm happy with. So I think we're going to be coming up with some good ideas, and I think we'll be working together to solve a lot of issues here.
Thank you so much. For those of you who may not know that, Deputy Chief Garcia was the person singled out by the MRAC people, which is the mental health group that is concerned about interactions between the mental health, people with mental health issues, and the police department. And Deputy Chief Garcia has been working very successfully with that group of community volunteers, and he was mentioned specifically in a positive way in the monitor's report. So we are grateful that you are both still doing that and also helping with this compliance piece. We're really grateful to you. I'm hoping that we can arrange for a time with you or your designee to be able to talk about with myself and the committee chairs, like once a month on the off, the 2-week piece in between our meetings, to be able to talk about the issues we have collectively, so that when the time the board member meeting comes, we have some guidance from you and we have a chance to have resolved some of those problems. Is that something that I should call you about?
Chair Fine, yes, definitely contact me. I'd like to have those meetings. I think they need to be consistent, not only with your board, but also with all the amici, all the parties to the settlement agreement.
Okay.
I think that constant communication, I think, is really going to improve our efforts.
Well, we'd have no problem with those people being included. We just can't constitute a quorum of ourselves. So, but we can participate with other people as well. So perhaps I'll give you a call and we can go from there.
Yes,
Would that
please.
be all right? I have a couple of specific questions. The Academy, we were in process of getting a shortened Academy for the members of this board, and we're going to have new members come February. And so we talked with Major Tyler about a 6-month cycle of having this shortened Academy for us and possibly CPCs. One in February, because that's when our terms expire, so we know we'll have vacancies then. And then 6 months later, so that would be July. And we're hoping that can happen. Can you tell us where we are with that?
Chair Fine, board members, yes, I spoke to Commander Collins from the Academy, and he advised me they're planning on starting the first one in February. I didn't get word on the second one, though, but I think I'll speak to him again, plus our meetings that we're going to continually. We need to be sure to bring that up to the commander, and I can have him at those meetings if necessary.
Okay.
But it is a shortened session. It's going to be 9 sessions, I believe. And then at the end of 2018, he's going to evaluate the training to see if they need to add or delete any information.
Okay, well, I'm really glad to hear about that. And I, perhaps it's the other things that city attorney may be able to talk about that. The other things were the changes in the ordinance, and maybe Mr. Schmiel can talk about that. The MOU, which would be him as well, on the mediation and the ride-alongs. I think I heard that that's with DOJ, but I don't think I have any other questions for you. Sir, does anyone else?
No, welcome, thank you.
We're
you
so
very much.
grateful you're here.
Thank you.
Glad to have you on
And
board.
Sarita, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm grateful to you for
I
that.
have one question. Who will be in charge of the academy and who's replacing Major Tyler?
Right now, we have Commander Collins is going to stay at the academy as the commander, and then Deputy Chief Roger Banez will be over the academy.
Roger Bonnie.
Thank you.
And I work very well with him, so our communication is very good, so that's going to improve as well.
It's a good guy.
Your reputation for communication precedes you, sir.
Thank
In
you.
a good way, in a very good
I
way.
think my wife thinks I speak too much, but
No one could accuse you of that. Thank you for being here, both of you. I'm grateful to you.
If I may, Chair?
Yes, please.
Sure, thanks. So again, I'm Sarita Nair. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer. Nobody knows what that means, but basically it's City Manager and in charge of the personnel system. I wanted to thank you on behalf of myself and Mayor Keller, not just for having us here tonight, but for the work that you do on this board. I know that community participation can be messy and frustrating, but working through that is how we build community, and we know that that's what you're doing here, so we appreciate it. We've taken a few big steps since Mayor Keller took office on December 1st, and I just wanted to recap for those of you who aren't frantically following the newspapers. We announced new leadership, so Police Chief Michael Geyer, Deputy Chief Rogelio Banez, Deputy Chief Harold Padilla, and of course, Deputy Chief Garcia in that compliance role. If you don't know any of their stories or you don't know them personally, I would definitely invite you to learn more about them, because they're all amazing, including Chief Geyer, who worked 20 years at Chicago PD and then came back here, shaved his head, started at the academy all over again. And Harold Padilla was with the Property Crimes Unit, and they all have a great reputation for community policing. So our intent is really to focus on community policing, putting more cops on the street to make our streets safer, and DOJ compliance. And those three go together in our eyes. We're not just here to get the DOJ out of town. We need to actually do the work. We also today had a press conference about reorganization where we announced Chief Garcia's position. We also announced that we had placed all commander positions in an acting role so that we could evaluate, among other things, their commitment to community policing, make sure everyone was in the right place. We eliminated the rank of major, which is why Major Tyler is no longer over the academy. For those of you who don't know, it used to be like that, so APD is used to functioning without that additional layer of bureaucracy, and in budgetary times like we are now, we just felt it was important to get as many people as we could back on the streets doing police work. We also hired Gilbert Gallegos as our communications director, and also he's in charge of community engagement. That's actually a position that's required under the court-appointed special settlement agreement, and has some specific paragraphs, as you guys call them, in that agreement. And his job is not only to work with the PIOs, who are the sworn officers who make public statements, but also to really make sure that the community policing councils are engaged in effective communication, which in our view is not just folks telling us what's going on, but then also hearing back what we did with their concerns. So Gilbert will be there, and it would also be a great point of contact. In addition to Chief Garcia, if you have questions and he's doing his job and you can't find him, you can always find Gilbert as well. So I would invite you to talk to him whenever you'd like. And then finally, we're just working to come up to speed. DOJ and Dr. Ginger are going to be here next week for a few days. They are flying out specifically to help the new leadership understand where the issues are, learn a little more about the history that we might not have seen from sort of the other side of City Hall. And we intend to have a presence moving forward in all of these activities. It may not always be me, but we will always be at these meetings. It is Mayor Keller's #1 priority is public safety, and so he wanted to make sure that I expressed that to you tonight.
Well, we are so grateful that you're here, and you may not know this, but our agenda has always included a space for the mayor's office. You can see it on this agenda. And we have never had anyone from the mayor's office join us in the last 3 years. So we are very grateful to have you here. And we are grateful to Mayor Keller for his commitment to this process.
Thank you.
If we could,
I
in
would do it
in
better.
regards to all the names that you gave us with, you know, like the deputy chief, can we get their names and titles and phone numbers and information, on one sheet? Would that work?
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you.
And I believe that if it's not already up there, the new org chart will be on the website in the next couple of days, so you can take a look at that, and if you have questions, talk to Chief Garcia or to Gilbert Gallegos.
And
Perfect.
Gilbert, it would be appropriate to contact him about what exactly?
About anything you have questions with, because he's communications, but
Oh, okay.
specifically the org chart should be on the website, the revised organizational chart that we unveiled today should be on the website if it's not already by the end of this week. And then if you look at that and say, I don't understand it, or it's too small, I can't read it, which is what I always say, then you can talk to Gilbert.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Serena.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, City Council. Julian is not here, and we do have questions for him about the process of picking new board members. Dr. Ring and Dr. Brown are both leaving the board in February. And so do we have any information, Mr. Harness?
Chair Fine, he did send an email.
I didn't see it.
Okay. Let me get my computer back open here. It,
It fell asleep.
energy
let me guess.
conservation, went to sleep.
It's, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, so Mr. Moya sent two emails. His apologies for not being able to make it this evening. He had a conflicting event for a city councilor. Since reopening the application process for POB membership, they've received 26 applications. The selection committee in the council office is currently reviewing the new applications. Once completed, we'll recommend candidates to the city council to replace Dr. Brown and Dr. Ring. We're working to have that done beginning of January. Also working on the reappointment for Board Member Waits and Board Member Armijo. That should go to the city council at the same time. He then sent a second email to update you on the progress of O-17-55,
Which is,
prohibiting elected officials and departments, boards, commissions, and advisory groups of the City of Albuquerque from organizing, sponsoring, advertising, or hosting political forums. It will be on the agenda for final action at the City Council on Monday, December 18th.
okay. There was one other thing. I will just call him about that. Is there anything else that anybody wants to remember for next time with Mr. Moya? We need to go back to, I left out the other Lieutenant Garcia, or the other Garcia, I should say.
Thought she was gonna get away.
No, she thought she was going to escape, but she didn't. I would not miss her report.
Good evening, Chair Fine, honorable board members. For the month of November, we dispatched 43,150 calls for service. Internal cases for the month of November, we completed 13. 12 of those were completed and investigated by the Internal Affairs Section. One was investigated by the Area Command. We had no cases administratively closed, no cases mediated. Discipline imposed for the month. We issued 1 verbal reprimand for missed court, 5 letters of reprimand. Those included conduct, officers' duties, compliance with rules and regulations, and violation of our on-body recording device policy. We issued 1 8-hour suspension, for failure to comply with officer's duties, 1 16-hour suspension for the safekeeping of evidence, 1 32-hour suspension for not complying with rules and regulations, 1 60-hour suspension for the same, a 320-hour suspension related to reporting for duty, and 1 termination also for compliance with laws, rules, and regulations. Pending IA cases for the month of November, 19. Internal Affairs and Area Command administrative cases opened for the month were 7. Our early intervention and recognition system, we had 25 alerts sent out. 3 of those were job well dones. The remaining all were related to the officers meeting the overall thresholds. The incidents that did trigger those alerts, we had 6 CERT investigations, 3 vehicle crashes, 1 internal affairs investigation, 1 civilian police complaint, 1 internal affairs investigation by the area command, 3 additional concern memos, those are related to use of force cases, and 7 for vehicle pursuits. And I would like to say that those 7 were all related to 1 pursuit. It was not 7 different pursuits. They were 7 different involved officers. And I stand for any questions.
I don't know if I'm seeing this any different than last month. It seems like we're getting more information, more data, especially on the different cases that, suspensions and things like that. I guess 2 months ago it was a secret. Now with this, what you just presented, it shows us exactly what you're doing and what's going on. So whatever, maybe I missed it before, but I appreciate it, what you've given us today. So thank you.
Chair Fine, Board Member Wades, anytime that you want information, we'll do our best to provide you accurate information and be transparent as possible.
Okay.
So that's based on your recommendations. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question. This isn't in regards to what you presented. This is in regards to the APD cadets, the 118th class. I looked at this over whatever time, and noticed in regards to the 117th class, there was 24, let me see here, 33 cadets started, and this is going down all the way through that were taken off for whatever reason. 33 started and 24 graduated. That was the 117 class. And now we lost an officer. So it's it's kind of weird. In regards to that, is the 118th class completed yet?
Chair Fine and Board Member Armijo, I believe the class graduates on the 21st of this month.
And do you know how many made it?
Sir, no, at this time I do not. I do not know if Deputy Chief Garcia has that information and can provide that to you, but I do not have that information at this time.
Okay, that's fine.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. I don't have that information, but we can get that for you.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I have one question. I went to the Monday Northeast, Southeast Area Command, and someone whose name, it was the Foothills, I'm sorry, Foothills, who gave the APD Academy presentation. It was Sean somebody, who's an instructor there. I didn't catch his last name, I'd just like to know who it was if I.
Chair Fine, Dr. Cass, I do not have that information. I can get that for you. We do have a sergeant over there.
His
may
last
have given
name
that.
is like Lockery or?
Lockie, Sergeant Lockie,
How do you spell that, please?
Lockey.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks. That's who did it, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. This is an almost predictable question from me, but last month I asked the question about the lack of accident reports, and I was told that you all had decided to present them on a quarterly basis. Well, they were not presented in October, they were not presented in November, so this is the end of a quarter, and I don't see anything.
Yes, Chair Fine and Dr. Ring, I was not involved in that decision. I will look into that for you, and I'll make sure that we do present those in January for you.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? All right. Okay, so let's see, where are we? Julie Moyer, Mayor's Office, City Attorney.
Chair Fine, if I may for just a second, I got a hold of Commander Collins. We have 41 cadets are going to graduate next week.
Great.
There were 42, but one just got injured, so she's going to have to go through the next class, but 41 will graduate.
That's gotta be
That's
your
great.
largest class. That's over the
Yes, the largest in quite a while.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great news, thank you.
Good evening, Chair Fine and board members. Just a few things to report out, just for your information. I think it directly impacts the community, so I think you should know about it. Some time back, the parties filed a joint motion to clarify an issue that was brought about due to language in the settlement agreement. That language stated that communications between the monitor and the parties would be exempted from disclosure. And we all know IPRA is there. So we felt it necessary to seek clarification from the court. And the court recently, I think it was last Friday, issued an order clarifying the application of or the interplay between the CASA and IPRA, and basically said that IPRA rules in that domain, so that if a request for documents related to the reform effort is put upon the city, then we would abide by IPRA unless one of the stated exceptions applied. So I think that's important for y'all to know. The next thing is a compliance plan, and you'll remember the action plan that was done in the last reporting period, which I think fell flat, quite frankly. As a result of that and comments by amici at the last public hearing, the compliance plan is to be born. By January 31st, the city is to provide to the court, after comment by the parties, and then an opportunity for the city to amend it according to those comments, by the 31st, present something for the court to approve. The structure of the compliance plan will involve 3 critical areas. The first being areas of deliberate noncompliance or deliberate indifference. And it's important to think about this. That's the first umbrella. And under that umbrella will be all the recommendations from IMR 6. Fundamentally from IMR 6 will go under there. The second category, and it's very similar to the third, but it's anything not covered by the first category. And then the third category is anything not covered by the first and second. So it's really supposed to be a comprehensive document as far as approaching issues raised, not just in the monitor's reports, but also by the amici. So those concerns that were raised at the public hearing, your concerns that were raised at the public hearing are being incorporated into that document. And then as far as application of that document, it's going to be what are the steps after you've identified those issues, and obviously the correlation to those recommendations. When will it be completed, the responsible party, and then finally, where would you expect to see evidence of compliance? And I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Dr. Ginger's methodology document, which basically says, I'm grading you on paragraph X, and I'm gathering Y data. I will draw a compliance determination based upon my definition. And let's just say it's a use of force investigation. So 95% of those investigations have to be within policy and training. So the reason why I bring that, and if that's convoluted, I apologize, but those data sources are also part of that methodology. And so those will be folded into the compliance plan. And so, the bottom line with that is I think it's going to be very helpful, very informative. It will also be very much a guiding document for the department. I can tell you that that's been something that we've been searching for, but we had some productive meetings leading up to that hearing on I think it was the 17th of November. And so I'm very happy to see that, because it'll lend the structure that's been badly needed to this process.
So you're, I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
Specifically, you're saying in your action plan, it will say not only what you're going to do, but what's the source, the underlying source of that information. Is that what you're saying?
Chair Fine and board members, so the way it works is we receive requests for data from the monitoring team to
Right.
show compliance.
Right.
So what that pocket represents is where we'd expect to see compliance. So that work is, the result of it is the documents, the data that would show compliance. So that's how that,
So it's
the work
data-driven.
product. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yes. Any other questions on that issue? Now, with regard to Dr. Cass's comments and 352, which seems like the Dracula in the room, I actually was glad that was delayed, and I had a role in that. And the reason was it was lacking in a lot of areas. It was. I think the timing of things, as far as making sure that POB input, CPOA POB input is considered as one thing, but I also think there are issues with the ordinance that have to be pulled in. And I also think that there are some shortcomings in the way that things are happening from a process perspective at those meetings. I think Dr. Cass raises some good points with that as well. It's very frustrating when you have a policy that is amended offline and you come into a meeting, and I know that Director Harness has expressed the same concern. So I think that working group is actually a really good step to have that dialogue, because we discussed a piece of it, but I think there was a lot more that could have been restructured and improved upon with 352 in particular. And then, and I know you mentioned it just really briefly, actually two things you mentioned earlier. The ride-along form, that was approved and sent over after Mr. Jackson asked for the approval from the city. So that should be.
It's done?
Yes.
Okay, so who has it? So because when we go on a ride-along, they have us sign their regular form. So do we bring it with us? How does this work?
I'll yield to Council Jackson.
Chair Fine, we have not discussed the particulars of how that worked. I do know that Dr. Cass has been working to set up his ride-along, and he has submitted the new ride-along form to with Sergeant Legendre. Is that?
Yes. Yes, that's right.
So we have the form, and we're going to make sure that Director Harness has that available for board members. It would probably be best to make sure that gets distributed to APD so that they understand that that's the appropriate form for ride-alongs, because it may not always be the same contact point with an APD when setting that up. But we can discuss that offline and find the best way to take care of that.
Okay, and we could possibly put it on SharePoint so we can bring it with us. We can print it out and bring it with us.
Yes, Chair Fine, I think actually Attorney Jackson did distribute it to to the POB.
Yeah, but I'm going to forget where it is, so if it's on SharePoint, I'll know where to go to get it.
Okay, I will upload it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Chair Fine and board members, if you have an issue, just let me know, and I'll do whatever I need to do and make sure that that's facilitated. I can certainly help out with that. Then with regard to the mediation issue, so the mediation MOU was approved by the parties. Everything was good to go with that. We had a pretty quick turnaround with that. The next step was, because there's a mechanism in the settlement agreement to allow for suspension of a policy where there's a needed improvement or maybe a flaw, that's where we're at with a proposed order to the court. Mr. D'Amato had circulated around a draft of that document. I commented back on it and provided it to Mr. D'Amato and Mr. Riles, and we're waiting on Mr. Riles.
I don't know who Mr. Riles is.
From the DOJ, one of the United States attorneys, or attorneys for the United States, rather. And so then what happens after that is that provision will be suspended. Mr. Harness can do his work under the new MOU and gather information, see how well it works, and then potentially we can go back and amend accordingly.
Okay. So this is an MOU, for those who don't know, an MOU that has to do with mediation instead of other avenues, so that civilian complaints can be mediated. And there was some conflicting language in the ordinance and other things, and they sorted it out. That's what this MOU is. Okay?
Yes. Chair Fine and board members, if you have any other questions, and certainly I would just like to echo what was stated by Deputy Chief Garcia. I I have an open line communication to Director Harness, and certainly if any issues arise, you can feed them through him, and I'll act as swiftly as possible to.
We know you've been very helpful in this process, sir.
I've tried.
We know that, okay? So we already know that. We know
Okay.
we can count on you.
Well, I just wanted to make sure it was restated.
Okay, all right. So we don't have any information on the ordinance itself being changed. Do you have any information about that, or what's happening with the city council?
Chair Fine and board members, I don't. I know that the issue with regard to the chief's responses and the ordinance was brought to my attention probably 2 months ago. I had a conversation with Director Harness, and I think the next, and I think that there need to be several ordinance changes, and I'm not as familiar with that process, but certainly I think that's something that is called for with that one issue, but then also others that have been brought up. So whatever I can do to facilitate that, if that means speaking with Mr.
Well, I
Melendres.
don't know, and one of the shortcomings of having volunteers in this is we often don't know. Maybe somebody else here knows, but I don't know. We submitted as a board suggested changes to the ordinance. And so far as I know, it's still in the city council process, and we don't know where it is, and now we have more, ideas for that. So I'm just trying to get a handle, and I'm sorry Mr. Moya isn't here, but I'm trying to get a handle on, did we get those approved? Are any of them approved? Where are we with that?
If I can speak to that, I've put together a plan for contacting city council, and I believe that was emailed to all the board members earlier this week, and it involves looking at the ordinance changes themselves. And at our last Policy and Procedures Committee, we assigned each item that was being addressed by the ordinance change to someone mostly to Director Harness, to write up an explanatory paragraph that dealt with each of those changes. And the idea is that any change that we make has to be justified to the council. The council, if this was something that came up at the last meeting, and you tasked me with connecting with Julian Moya, and I did that, and I've talked to several council members as well, and as I said, I put together a plan to, systematically allow people on the board, to encourage people on the board to make contact, but to do it in a coordinated way, and that's Amanda Bustos is going to be the coordinator for that, so that we can avoid the open meetings, rolling quorum situation.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So do we know where the document we sent to the city council is at this moment? I understand that, I think there's lots of good reasons why we should make contact with the city council members, but specifically, I don't know where the answer to our suggested changes is.
I don't think there is an answer at this point. I think that
It's months.
But I don't think it went anywhere. I think the first thing that needs to happen is it needs to be a city council member needs to subscribe to be a sponsor, and it would be even better to have 2 sponsors. So in order to get that sponsor, I think we first need to talk to city council members to find a sponsor.
Mr. Harness.
So that, I don't believe it ever got past the stage, past that stage.
Okay. Mr.
Chair,
Schmiel.
Chair Fine,
Yeah.
the proposed changes were drafted by council's legal staff, and it was reported by Mr. Moya that those proposed changes and amendments were sent to the City of Albuquerque City Attorney's Office for their review. And we have not heard back.
There is a reason we brought this up while you were here.
We have not heard back as to any amendments or changes that they have. So the last report that we have from Mr. Moya is that the draft and the proposed amendment went to the City Attorney's Office for review, and beyond that, there aren't any sponsors to bring it forward at this point.
Chair, Fine, and board members, I'll touch base with Chris Melendres. He would be the counsel for the council and follow up.
We would really love to hear
Okay.
what's up with that, and if you could just tell Mr. Harness, he could let us all know.
Okay, and I think this is an opportunity to if there are more, it's much more efficient to get those in now rather than do it piecemeal.
Yeah,
So I could certainly speak with Mr. Harness, and we can get the laundry list included, and we can maybe have a sit-down with Mr. Melendres if that's appropriate. I'm not that familiar with
that is appropriate,
with
and
the
I think
process.
that
Okay.
Dr. Cass would be a good person to go
Okay,
to visit with that as well.
very well.
That's all I have, sir. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Other
Thank you
than
for
good
being
night,
here.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate it. We do not, we have Mr. Harness's report.
Chair Fine, fellow board members, just a couple of things. Thanks to the Personnel Subcommittee and thanks to the board for their feedback in my review. I look forward to continuing to do the work, and I'm honored to do so. Next week, I believe there will be a series of meetings set up, facilitated by the Department of Justice. As Attorney Martinez is calling them, she's calling them retreats, to get the city, the new city staff, up to speed on all that's occurred over the last 3 years since the settlement agreement has come into place. There is a role, desired role by POB and CPOA to present at one of those retreats, and it's just going to, simply because of scheduling, it's going to have to be on short notice, so it will happen next week, and whomever might be available to accompany me to that retreat, I will let you know when those are arranged, okay?
I blocked out those 3 days on my calendar.
Okay,
Like I said, this Christmas isn't my holiday, so I'm good.
okay.
What days were they?
He said next week. He was not
Next
sure.
week.
Any day or?
Well, they have to work around the graduation of the 118th cadet class, which is Thursday. So that would take up the bulk of the morning on Thursday. So they're going to work around that, and everybody else is scheduled to try to get this time in.
But it would be during the day.
But it will be during the day. So it's just a matter of getting everybody's schedule together between the DOJ, the monitoring team, and all of the parties from the city. Investigator Scott DePole and Davidson went to the Use of Force Symposium in Connecticut. They sent back, they got back and said it was a great presentation by the Dago Law Group, and they presented some very forward information regarding use of force. Last week I had a meeting with District Attorney Michael Cooper. He's the district attorney in charge of the officer-involved shooting investigations. They were just getting to the Gabaldon shooting that this body reviewed 2 months ago. So that's where they are as far as their review. They have 4 attorneys, they only work part-time, and they only look at the aspects of the shooting itself. They are not allowed to look at other possible criminal violations that might be involved in any particular act. So for example, in the Gabaldon shooting that this board reviewed, this board found that the actual, this board found that there were policy violations that were beyond the shooting itself. There was the involvement of the truck, the involvement of the taser used as a weapon, not prescribed, and this board recommended substantial suspensions for 2 officers. As you know, the chief did not concur with those and found them to be in policy. Those particular findings, if criminal, this OIS review team would not make a recommendation on those charges. They simply look at the shooting itself and that is it. That's their narrow scope. He said otherwise they would not be able to complete the cases. So understand that when an OIS goes to the district attorney's office, all they're looking is at the shooting itself. They're not going to look at any other excessive force or any other aspect of the case.
But is it fair to say that the other aspects of the case between internal affairs and us reviewing it would be, the other matters would be dealt with? In other words, if there was some wrongdoing, wouldn't it end up in discipline or end up in suspension, or either from our recommendation or IA's?
Certainly, but that's only on an administrative level. That's not on a criminal level.
Oh, you're talking about criminal behavior besides the shooting?
That's, yes.
Okay. Okay. So, Lieutenant Garcia, can you tell me, does that preclude your dealing with this criminally? I mean, in other words, if the DA is not willing to look at it, there's nothing you can do about it?
Chair Fine, if during the investigation we determine that there may be criminal activity related to something other than the actual use of force itself, we would refer it to our force investigation team or another criminal investigative body within our department to go ahead and look at that, speak with the district attorney and see if they would like to pursue or would be willing to pursue charges unrelated to that, to the use of force.
So they're not saying that they wouldn't deal with it. They're saying they're not investigating anything in the DA's office other than the officer-involved shootings. Tell me where the holes are in this, because I think that sounds like, you know, if you're going to do something wrong, you might as well do it when you're doing an officer-involved shooting, because no one's going to pay attention to that. You can get away with murder.
Chair Fine, they are relying on the criminal investigation that would be from the FIT team from APD to do any other aspects of that incident. They will not look at
So it's not a free ride.
They will not look at it in its totality. So it's just a matter of understanding that I believed that when the district attorney's office was reviewing an incident, they reviewed the entire incident when it was an officer-involved shooting, and they are not. They would be relying on APD's investigation for other criminal aspects of that incident.
And my specific question is, if IA finds other criminal activity, it's not a free pass. That goes back through in a different venue. Is that in a different case?
The criminal recommendation will be made, but it won't be based upon the district attorney's investigation.
Okay, but it's still going to be investigated. Nobody gets a pass. Okay, I just want to make sure I got that right. Okay. Did you have a question? Did one of you have a question? No. Okay.
None on that. I just wanted to, in regards to item number 11, I had a question for Deputy Chief before, so if he needed to leave, I could ask that question, because we're going to go into...
Well, Mr. Harness isn't done with his report.
Right. I just want to make that point, that's all.
Okay. He's asking you not to leave, Deputy Chief. Okay. Mr. Harness.
One other thing, December 28th or 29th, we had an attempted break-in to the CPOA office.
December?
I'm sorry, November.
Back to the future.
It does not appear that the person gained entry. I contacted Commander McCrae when it was discovered, and he sent over an impact detective from the Valley Command. I believe they have identified a suspect in the incident. I haven't gotten an update as yet because I've been out, but as a result, we're going to be having a security upgrade at the office. We're going to be installing badge entry only with a service window for the public that comes to see us. And we'll also be installing surveillance cameras at the door, front, and behind to ensure that our office is secure. The contractors have come out, they've done the measurements. I'm simply waiting for the bids so that I can get the requisition approved and work will get started.
What do you suppose people were interested in your office? Computers? I mean,
No, the identified suspect is the brother of a previously terminated APD officer.
oh my.
However, our office had nothing to do with that officer's termination.
They just
But-
assumed wrongly that there
Like,
was stuff there.
there's a lot of misinformation that we are internal affairs and that we have all that information, which we do not.
Okay. Well, do you feel like your staff is safe?
I do, we're safe, but we're going to upgrade.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
And so I stand for any questions.
I have a question about the the data contract. Where is that? There was some problem with the data contract.
Attorney Jackson and I will be discussing that issue tomorrow morning.
Okay, so we don't right now have a contract with UNM,
That's correct.
and it's held up, why?
The city attorney's office had some questions in conjunction with the department. So Attorney Jackson and I are going to discuss moving forward to get over those hurdles.
Okay. Thank you. Is that the end of your report, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there any other business to come before? Yes. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I didn't know, I must not have paid attention in regards to the council, meeting with council. I guess that's,
Well, he's not here.
okay. Or I thought Mr. Jackson was going to. Question I have for Deputy Chief. And also an idea for the board, possibly. Deputy Chief, we've been talking a lot about policy, and I was thinking about that. Are there any field officers that are on the policy board, the APD policy board?
Chair Fine, Board Member Armijo, I believe there are, but my goal is to incorporate more line officers and supervisors out there to give us their input as well.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I've been talking with officers and actually SO and different people is that many times policies are written without the buy-in and the pull-in of the people who really matter, and that is the officers that are on the ground. So with that, an idea that I had, and check this out with the board, I don't know if it would be appropriate or not to maybe every or other board meeting have a field officer come in with APD's approval and kind of report in regards to how policy is affecting them on the street, what their thoughts are, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of an idea to throw out there.
I agree with your point, your overarching point, but my solution to that is to do it on the ride-along. I think that's but you got 8 hours with somebody to get that information and feedback, and I have learned so much from the officers just in that ride-along. Because you're doing things together, and you can ask about those, you can see it for yourself. So I agree with the line officers getting feedback to us, but I think for me, the best way to do that is not in a presentation, but in a ride-along and ask the questions. Then I think we all do that on our ride-alongs. So I would suggest that you get your feedback that way. I think the policy, there's a question of who you'd pick and how you pick them, and these are guys who don't necessarily make presentations for a living, and so I think we may cause more aggravation than we get in terms of that by having it be here, and I think the output would be actually better from your ride-along. Has anybody else done that in your ride-along? And yeah.
Well, I have two.
Yeah.
I just think that sometimes they don't get the opportunity to be before a body like this.
Yeah, I'm not sure they want it.
Well, some do.
Well,
Some do,
they're
believe me.
certainly welcome to come and talk. If you have people you talk to that want to do that, they are welcome to do it.
Perfect.
They are for sure. Is there anything else Okay, there being none, our next meeting will be on January the 11th at 5 PM here in this room, and I would accept a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn?
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.